Alpha. Danielle?
Yes, thanks, Kelly, for having me. I'm going to screen share. So I will focus on some of the key points of my recorded talk. I've been working with space and radio technologies for over 11 years and in general as an artist for more than 20 years. But I'm going to talk about one project in particular that I think is especially relevant for this conference, and the project COGITO in Space that I also presented at the Green Bank last year. So this work, I've been developing this project between 2013 and 2018, and there are quite a few philosophical ideas that I think are interesting perhaps to discuss later in the Q&A. One of these was inspired by especially this image actually that I saw in 2013 showing the nature of a human action on the surface of Mars. So this is the first hole drilled on the surface of Mars. And what really caught my attention in this image is how increasingly realistic these images relayed back by space probes are becoming, to the point that we can imagine the texture of the Martian sand, the smell of the soil, perhaps the sunlight on the surface of Mars. And yet we might never be able to experience these directly with our senses. So these kind of images on one side create global imagery, which is increasingly more, I would say, yes, powerful. We all now try to imagine more and more what outer space might be looking like. And yet this knowledge produced by these images remains perhaps dualistic in the sense that the body is very much disengaged from the kind of knowledge we gain through these photos. So this line of thinking also led me to the project, which essentially is exploring the possibility of traveling into space with the mind. So to travel faster and farther than our senses. And the project consists in sending brainwaves into space while the participant watches a film in virtual reality, showing experimental footage of the Earth seen from space. And for this part of the project, I've been collaborating with Frank White, who, as we all know, developed this idea of the overview effect, the cognitive shift happening in the mind of the astronauts and cosmonauts after witnessing the sight of the Earth from space. And also the collaboration with the neuroscientists was absolutely essential, and because I wanted the project to be scientifically accurate and really rigorous. So I wanted people to be able to understand that what we send into space is really sophisticated form of brain activity, or at least the best possible form of brain activity recording we can achieve at this moment in history. And the possibility of sending brainwaves into space has been explored also by science fiction, especially by Stanisław Lem's Solaris and the follow-up film by Andrei Tarkovsky. And what I find really interesting about this novel is that it is an exploration of the unreliability of reality and the power of human unconscious, a great examination of the limits of rationalism, according to Salman Rushdie. I don't have the quote for this reference, I'm afraid, but anyway, what I think is really important here in this novel is the fact that the knowledge we acquire through studying nature and reality from a materialistic perspective is perhaps should be put under additional scrutiny, and this is why philosophy, I think, is doing a very important, is adding a very important perspective to what science is actually researching. And also this perspective is echoed by Thomas Nagel, that has been very influential in this particular project of mine, And I found his perspective really interesting, especially for exactly shading some critique towards the scientific method and the kind of materialistic approach we have in trying to understand reality, including neuroscience. Nagel also shade some criticism towards the neuroscientific method. I don't know if that's a term. And how neuroscientists try to understand the mind completely bypassing, for example, the concept of consciousness. And a huge thanks to Chelsea Aramia for pointing me out to this thesis, the extended mind thesis by Andy Clark and David Chalmers, that I discovered not only without knowing as being leading the entire project from the start, but also perhaps my entire work as an artist has been perhaps built along this concept of extended mind thesis. The extended mind thesis speaks about cognition not as something which is restricted to the skull and the body, but extends to the proximate environment and even further. Now it has become a global cognition. Thanks to new technology, we are able to expand our impact worldwide, and with human space exploration, now we can have an impact even cosmically. So I think the fact that the possibility that cognition is perceived in such a way is very interesting, and also really makes much more concrete the human responsibilities when it comes to space exploration. So the action of space exploration is a direct result of our cognition. And I think that creates a really important link between us and our action into the invisible and untouchable. And as yesterday we spoke about interstellar messaging, of course I want to mention the Golden Record, which contains a 1-minute recording of brain activity of science writer Anne Droyan. And this was recorded in the 70s with the old-fashioned system of ink, needle, and paper. And also we spoke about how can we create a message perhaps that asks questions rather than just sending statements. And I completely relate to this suggestion. And in fact, I would say this was one of the leading aspects of the work of the project. When we worked with the neuroscientists at the Dwingelor Radio Telescope, which is actually the stage of this performance, our intention was to record the activity of the entire brain, so record the brain activity through this lab-grade device, which has 32 electrodes in combination with virtual reality. And the intention was to record what is called the spontaneous cognition or a river of consciousness. There are several terms for that. So the spontaneous cognition produced by the film in virtual reality. So spontaneous cognition is an unstructured form of thought, and it is perhaps, as far as we know at this moment in neuroscience, the most representative form of brain activity of our daily experience of life. So for me, conceptually, the river of consciousness was really a way to represent our existential condition on Earth. And how does COGITO in Space tries to ask questions? Well, the project focuses on the continuous thought process, as I mentioned, that occupies most of our individual narrative, on the existential struggle and conflicted nature of a sensing being, on their deepest thoughts and doubts, asking a potential extraterrestrial listener, are you as conflicted as we are? Do you share our inner struggle? Can we empathize on what we don't know and cannot understand about our existence and the meaning of life? So it is a way of asking questions, but not in a kind of rational or it's more a form of, perhaps it's a way to establish a form of communication based on, I don't want to say empathy, sounds a bit extreme, but on a communication which is perhaps beyond our human understanding itself. So, which really poses the human being in a position of humbleness and self-reflection. How do we produce in the performance this state of mind wandering? Well, first of all, we have each performance is preceded by a walk in the nature surrounding the Dwingle radio telescope, and after the walk, which is based on loosely on concepts of on principles of big history, we lead the participants into the cabin, and that's where they send their brain activity into space. So again, this is the project website, but just to summarize, I think what is interesting in these different, well, in this project perhaps, is I think the philosophical concepts that I think could be relevant to this conference, and in general, the fact that when I'm facing this definition of art-science collaboration, I always have a bit of a uneasy feeling about it. So the term, in fact, kind of shows the two extremes, the two sides of the spectrum, art and science, whereas actually there is a lot more in between. There is philosophy, there is humanities, there is a lot more fields and work that goes into it, including the personal experience of the collaborators, of the artist herself, and so on. So it is a much more flexible term, in my opinion, although for now it is the only one that we have, and it's good to keep using it.
Okay, great. So, William, is that your hand up for this one too?
It is, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. If there are other questions.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I think we're good. Go ahead.
Okay, Daniela, I really appreciate the range, the scope of the work that you've done in different kinds of ways, right? I mean, it's not only that you are at times depicting space or memorializing and honoring the work that others have done in space, and that you're taking advantage of the technologies that are available, but you're also thinking about space and time in an astronomical sense as a medium, right? So there are many different kinds of ways in which you have, as an artist, interfaced with space. Can you help us, those of us who are not as much practicing artists, to help us conceptualize how we might classify different kinds of the very broad space art because of your expertise?
Yeah, I think my experience is, I think every artist has a very unique trajectory. In my case, my background is in performance art and contemporary dance. I'm a former contemporary dancer, and later I moved into video work, film work, and now into performance using technologies and science. So for me, really, the concept of space is really includes everything: inner space, like, you know, through neuroscience and introspection, and the immediate environment, like can be the stage, the performance stage, and now my performance is also usually shown globally. So on the internet, I can engage people from around the world in real time, and also can expand into the cosmos as well. So I think the concept of space is something that we inherently as humans carry within ourselves, and perhaps due to, you know, just pragmatic living, we have to restrict it to something which is manageable. But really, when you think of it philosophically and poetically, there is no boundary between, let's say, the interior space or outside space. So, for example, the organs are very close to the proximate environment. There is just this layer of skin, and it's just a matter of really density and kind of matter. So that's how I like to think of it. So to answer maybe your question, I think it's art, culture deal with space in such a diverse way that we just saw now in this conference, two very different forms of art. So I think there is really an endless possibility of both production and interpretation, depending on the viewer. So it's really about mirroring effect in art.
I wasn't aware of your background in dance, and of course, one could certainly conceive of what would a performance look like. How would you choreograph a piece that was in 0G or that was in low gravity? With that kind of, I don't know whether you think of it as a constraint removed or different, a new kind of constraint, right? I mean, so I suppose one way to classify the arts as one thinks about them in relation to space is, well, take what we already have, take dance and take painting and drawing and take fabric and, take all those sorts of things and see how they get transformed into space. But I'm also very interested in the kind of work that you and others have been doing in terms of thinking about the new opportunities that go beyond the kinds of classifications we already have existing in the art world.
Yes, absolutely. When I was performing as a dancer, I never really became a choreographer. I was mostly interested in in the motion itself, in the motion in space. So the perception of movement from within. And of course, I know there are some choreographers that have been working with 0G. Kitsu Dubois is really a pioneer in this term. She has done fantastic work with 0G and also some new performance, including a physicist I met last year at the conference in Washington, the ISC in Washington. His name is Adam Dippert, and he creates, is a circus performer and a physicist. And he really explores movement in a very mathematical way and extremely fascinating. It's really, I think, the ultimate expression of mathematics in poetry in motion. It's beautiful. I lost the question. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I was, simply from your own experience thinking about how we at SSoCIA or how people in general might think of conceiving of art as we go off world, right? And how we might, think about the different, as we classify things always, as we classify them here on Earth, the different kinds of space art.
Yeah, as I said earlier, art is really continuously changing. So for me, it's really interesting as an artist to keep really pushing the boundaries of art expression. So now with new technologies and interdisciplinarity, these boundaries are becoming more and more thin, loose. So sometimes, even my work sometimes is fluctuating so much between art and science that it's kind of difficult to frame it within one particular field. So I think we will keep moving in that direction. And in general, I think just knowledge in general will be pushing towards this more interdisciplinarity. Art in space, I think, should also abide by some ethical rules. I'm aware of some artworks that also are, kind of somehow colonizing other planets and stuff. I'm not a big fan of this idea, or anyway, I believe it should be discussed and pondered as a global decision. You can argue, okay, radio waves also do pollute space, it's true. In my case, this is not a METI project, so the intention is not to target particular planets. But anyway, I think as artists, we should abide by the same ethical rules as other entrepreneurs or anyone who has the power to do something which is public and global.
Okay, so sadly, we're out of time.